Well, glad to see you all tonight. Good time for us to be together. Thankful you're with us. We're continuing our study. We're in the 6th week of looking at the time between Old and New Testaments, and tonight that brings us to I've called it the Maccabean era. I don't know if it really has a specific name, a few different dynasties or names that we'll see tonight, but it all begins because of the work of the family of Judas Maccabeus, the most famous hero of that age, sort of. Kind of an unprecedented time, and one that has a lot to do with what we'll see developing in the New Testament. So quite a bit to cover tonight. Look forward to getting into that here in just a sec. Before we do, let's pray together. Holy Father, we are thankful for the time you've given tonight. We are grateful that you have provided for us and protected us today. We're grateful for each other and the blessing of seeing one another again. We are thankful above all and always for the redemption that you have given through Christ. We're thankful for his sacrifice, for his example, for everything that you, through him, have accomplished for us. We pray that we would live always in view of the sacrifice, that we would live always with his example in our minds, that we would try to be like him, that we would try to show others who he is and who you are. Please be with us tonight. Help us as we study and as we worship. Be with those who are teaching our little ones and help them to continue to grow in their understanding of you as well. We're thankful for this time we can share together and ask you would bless us as we use it. In his name we pray. Amen. Okay, really the story that we left off with last week goes directly into what we're talking about tonight. These kind of the end of one is the beginning of the other. If you remember the setting that we finished with last week, we'll just kind of go ahead and have all of that up there in mind. Remember, the Jews were under the control of the Seleucid dynasty or the Seleucid kingdom or the Syrians. We use those two kind of synonymously. If I say Syrian or Seleucid, we're talking about the same people. But they were under them, specifically during the reign of Antiochus IV, Antiochus Epiphanes, he was branded as a madman by a lot of his adversaries. I don't know how much of that was actual madness and how much was him just being a person prone to doing terrible things that others would say, hopefully, best case scenario, he's doing it because he's a crazy person. But under the harsh treatment of Antiochus IV, mingled with already some tensions between a few sects of the Jews that were coming to a boil, we maybe would say on the brink of civil war. Antiochus comes in to maybe calm that down, but ends up installing these absolutely overboard and completely damaging, ruinous measures. He desecrates the temple, goes inside, installs at the altar itself an image of Zeus, a marble sculpture of Zeus. He sacrifices a swine there on top of the altar, orders the Jews, and especially their priests, to make other sacrifices of swine, pigs, and forces them to eat pork, forces them to sacrifice to various Greek deities. Any copies of Scripture, because remember, those are more available now, any copies of the Jewish Scriptures that are found are confiscated and destroyed. That does not seem itself to have been a capital crime to be found with a Bible, but it is a capital crime to circumcise your children, to observe the Sabbath, to observe any of the feast days. Anyone caught doing those things will be summarily executed. Various, again, completely monstrous things he does to these people. He uses torturous means to execute many of his enemies. But as one might expect, there is shortly after all of these attempts are made to harm the Jews and to really end their religion, there is pushback and a revolt begins. So we mentioned kind of at the end of our history section last week, this man Mattathias. He's pretty old. I don't know exactly how old, but he's described as already being an aged man at the beginning of all of this and has grown sons. But Mattathias is a priest in the village of Modin. This is maybe 30 miles west, kind of northwest of Jerusalem, so kind of in the Judean hill country, sort of. But he is a priest in this village, and he refuses the order to sacrifice to the Greek idols. He is called upon by a Syrian official, a general who has come to enforce this, and Mattathias says, no, absolutely not going to do that. A different man, another Jew who is nearby, not wanting to risk Syrian displeasure with them, decides that he will step forward and do it. So he begins offering sacrifice to this Greek deity. And so then Mattathias does similar to what Eleazar had done back years ago in the Old Testament when someone is profaning things of God, when someone is worshiping false gods, and I'm there to stop it. I'll stop it through whatever means necessary. So Mattathias and his sons rush forward with drawn swords, kill that man, kill the Syrian official as well, and then flee into the wilderness, kind of gather some of their troops and get out before reprisals can come back against them. This is Mattathias and his 5 sons. Judas Maccabeus, that we'll talk about shortly, is one of them. A lot of the history that we get from this time, or I get one of the sources that we have from this time, is a book we'll talk about in a few weeks, First Maccabees. It's largely just a book of history. It reads a lot like reading First Kings, for instance, or Nehemiah, something to that effect. But this has quite a bit to say about all of these inciting events and what ends up happening with this rebellion. But those are the words of Mattathias recorded there, 1 Maccabees 2:27. Let everyone who's zealous for the law and supports the covenant come out with me. He invites all the people to join him in his cause, to join him in this resistance. And many do. This already, as we've said, there were kind of roughly these 2 sects of Jews, largely speaking, the Hellenists and the Hasidim, the pious ones who are devoted to the old ways, devoted to the traditions of their fathers, to keeping the law, to keeping the covenant, all of these things. And that was a very popular party with many of the people, especially in Judea, especially in and around Jerusalem. And so many people do rally to that cause, and they're effective in a sort of guerrilla campaign, hit and run, ambush, cut off supplies. They're very effective in this style of warfare against the Syrians. And so they begin to have quite a bit of success, and that attracts some more people. Their cause becomes more popular among the Jews, and so they win even more success. And for a while, things go pretty well for them. There were some setbacks when, and we've kind of talked about this idea before, with some of their enemies being able to exploit it. The Syrian commanders figured out if we can attack them on Sabbath days, that goes really well for them. Sometimes it was just a slaughter. They refused to fight. And sometimes they would just catch them unawares because they had not been traveling that time. We can kind of pinpoint more easily where they are because we knew where they were yesterday, and we know they're not going to have moved. They won't have journeyed during this time. So that became kind of a difficult thing to navigate. Mattathias made the declaration, this is, when it's done to spare our lives, when it's done in self-defense, it's done in the service of a good goal to allow us to continue as a people, we can, in fact, fight on the Sabbath. And everyone said, okay, I like that idea better. And so they began actually allowing themselves to fight on the Sabbath. Eventually, Judas and his men, Mattathias dies kind of during all of this and appoints Judas as the leader of the military arm of their movement that had begun to grow. So Judas eventually makes his way to Jerusalem, succeeds in taking the city. They cleanse the temple, they rededicate the temple, and that's kind of a keystone event of all of this history here. When someone today celebrates Hanukkah, 8-day festival of lights, they're celebrating this. They're celebrating the rededication of the temple after Judas took it. On the 25th of that month of Kislev, of their December, roughly to us. It'll be different on our calendar every year, but that's when that feast begins. That's what they're celebrating. That's what they're honoring, his victory in reclaiming the temple, rededicating it after it's being profaned by Antiochus IV. Lysias is the man in charge of the Syrian army, and he leads a large force, gathers a huge army, and descends against Jerusalem in a siege. It's not just the Syrians. There are a lot of belligerent neighbors as well, non-Jewish neighbors who don't like the Jews for one reason or another. It seems there have historically just been many for people to choose from, but they all come against them in this great siege, and things look dire for a while, but they are holding out in the siege until eventually Lysias perceives a greater threat. Some foreign adversary is coming against Antioch, Syrian Antioch, we'd call it from the New Testament, not too far north, but that is a much more important city to them, to his king, and is under much more threat than things seem to be in Jerusalem at the time. So he offers terms of peace. This is in the year 162. He extends to Judas and to his followers the option of making peace. I thought I had that up a second ago, excuse me. So they decide we need to get back north, and why don't we call things off here? Now, Judas does not want this to happen. He sees this as a half measure. We haven't accomplished what we wanted to. We need to keep fighting. We need to make our own nation. They're just going to come back again. We're going to find ourselves right in the same situation again if we make peace with them now. They can't be trusted to keep their word. He does not think that it is a good idea. But there's a provisional council in place in Jerusalem that says, no, we should. We should do this. The sticking point, maybe, is that Lysias says all of those laws that we tried to enforce upon you, not being able to have the scriptures, no circumcision, no Sabbath, all that kind of stuff that we said that you all couldn't do, trying to make you sacrifice to Greek gods and all that, forget that ever happened, all right? Our bad. That was dumb. We shouldn't have done that. We're not going to meddle in your affairs anymore. You practice your religion, totally protected from now on. Well, that's been, for a lot of these people, the goal that they were fighting for. That's what the Hasidim wanted to accomplish to begin with. We just want to be able to exercise our religion. We want that kind of freedom. And so if they're willing to offer us that, mission accomplished. I mean, this is a victory. And so, again, against Judas' wishes, they accepted these terms and struck this peace deal with Syria for the moment. Part of this, the high priest Menelaus, we talked about him last week, not a great guy, really responsible for a lot of the problem in the first place. He's executed. He's replaced by a man, Alchemist, who at least has going for him that he is evidently a provable descendant of Aaron, so he is sort of reviving the priesthood of Aaron, which could not be said of Menelaus, but he is seen as a sort of moderate figure, maybe a kind of a compromise, and everyone thinks, well, maybe this will be fine. So Alchemist is made high priest. They agree not to punish Judas or any of his brothers, any of the leaders in the rebellion. There's going to be no imprisonment, no executions, anything like that. You all will go free. We're not going to intervene any further. We're not going to be back trying to make more laws against Judaism. We're not going to tax you more heavily, any of that stuff. Let's just call it quits right now. The walls of Jerusalem end up being torn down as well, and there's, I guess, conflicting evidence or often a lack of evidence on whether this was part of that peace or if that was Lysias doing so afterward as a way of saying, this, don't do this again. Don't rebel against us again, because next time we come, you won't have city walls anymore, so it's not going to go well. Maybe they agreed to that. That point is kind of at issue sometimes, I guess. But again, the result, either way, is that their defenses are weakened, which signals to Syria, okay, maybe they will actually do what we've asked them to do. So this kind of tenuous peace is put in place. However, how often have we started to see this now with these priests? Alchemist, the new high priest, this supposedly moderate Hellenizer, is not that at all. He is more extreme than we feared. He's more wicked than we feared. And so the people already begin to grow uneasy with him. And in response to some of the complaints that he hears, he doesn't change his ways. He doesn't try to compromise and kind of appease the people that he is supposed to be the priest, the mediator for. Instead, he has dozens of them killed and executes a lot of his enemies among the Hasidim. So, as one would expect then, this says to many of the people who thought, okay, we'll make peace, we'll get a kind of, milquetoast in-between kind of guy as priest, maybe everyone will be happy with that, but now he starts killing guys. Maybe Judas was right. Maybe we should have listened to him in the first place, and so once again they flee out into the Judean wilderness and begin joining up with these guerrilla bands again. Alchemist tries to get some aid from Syria. Goes back to the people who were kind of responsible with putting him in that seat to begin with, and appeals to Demetrius the First, who is now the Seleucid king. Send me some help here. They're about to run me out of town. They're about to, tar and feather me. They're very, very upset here. So what can we do about it? Goes and tries to get some aid. Judas also is gathering some outside help. He appeals to Rome and secures a treaty with them at least. This doesn't prove to be ultimately very fruitful, but at least is going to act as maybe some kind of stopgap, some kind of check against the Syrians that maybe they don't want to offend Rome. But Demetrius overall is saying, well, I've messed with Rome before. He was formerly a hostage of Rome, a political hostage of the Romans, and had escaped from that. He already was no friend of theirs, and so he was undeterred by this and brings a huge force against Judas. The war had kind of been going against the Maccabeans for a while now. They had had some losses, they had had some setbacks. In the end, they were left with, Josephus says, evidently only about 800 men in their main force. And so facing an opposing force of about 20,000 people who had come from the Syrians, they eventually were overwhelmed, and Judas himself ends up dying in battle there in about 160. Well, things continue on with his brothers now leading the charge. And back to this style of hit and run and hide type of guerrilla warfare that they had been engaging in, but are also going to do kind of what we mentioned just a second ago. We need allies. So who can we talk to? Who can we ingratiate ourselves to? And during this time, the Seleucids have quite a bit of civil conflict going on, a lot of kind of throne intrigues that these Jewish leaders figure they can maybe exploit to their advantage. So one of the other sons, Jonathan, he throws his support behind this Alexander Ballas. He's supposed to be a son of Antiochus IV. He actually has a kind of unknown or a contested lineage, but supposedly a son of the Seleucid kings. But he's trying to take the throne for himself. And so with that support, after he wins, Alexander Ballas wins his kind of brief civil war, and so he appoints Jonathan as high priest in 153. Gives him a lot of other honors as well. This is, maybe with Jonathan you have the greatest friendship between the Syrian kings and the Jewish leaders. Jonathan goes to Alexander's wedding. He had a political wedding to kind of solidify things in the Syrian house, and Jonathan goes to that and is seated between the king and queen, is put in kind of the highest position possible, and they speak to him almost like an equal, really give him a lot of honors and send him home as a great friend. All that's in about 153. So chose the right side there. Later, though, he is tricked and ultimately captured by another imposter, Tryphon, is going to capture him and end up killing him. He takes him as a hostage first, but ultimately kills him. So Jonathan dies, and as a result, then Simon, another son, a third son of Mattathias, is made high priest in his place. He is also going to get embroiled in what's going on with the Syrians. That seems like the best path to power. Maybe it seems like the best path to peace and to autonomy or independence at this time. So he picks Demetrius II, and he wins, And so now Simon has the high priesthood and is able to, as a result of his friendship and support of Demetrius II, he's able to gain independent governing for the Jews. They're not considered an independent nation at this time, not yet, but they can make their own laws, they govern themselves. It's really far beyond anything that they had experienced really for the last, 400 years. I mean, it's been a long time since we've seen anything like this for the Jews. And Jonathan is declared leader and high priest. That's the title given to him. It had been kind of assumed by men like Jonathan before him, but now he is recognized in some kind of official capacity as the leader and high priest over the Jewish people. If you're reading a commentary or if you're reading a history of people in the New Testament times, we'll see some connection to them as well, of the Hasmonean dynasty or the Hasmonean rule. That's referring to this family, to these people. Hasmonus or Asmoneus was one of their ancestors, and so they took on that name. We don't really know why they got that name attached to them, but this is the start of a dynasty that will go up really until the end of Jewish independence. Will really go up right until kind of the beginning of the New Testament age, almost. So all starts with Simon, really. But Simon is not going to be very long-lived in that role. He is murdered by his son-in-law, Ptolemy, not connected to the other Ptolemies that we studied a couple of weeks ago. He's not a pharaoh. He's not an Egyptian king. It was just a popular name by that time. But he is murdered along with two of his sons at a banquet, and one of his sons survives. A third son, John Hyrcanus, was meant to be killed but escaped in that bloodbath that happened there. And John Hyrcanus ends up becoming this priest and leader that Simon had been. So we're now in the third generation. This would be Mattathias' grandson that we're dealing with John, a nephew of Judas Maccabeus. So John Hyrcanus has his power recognized by Syria, as we talked about. It's still a subject, but they're still saying you can do as you wish to do. As far as the politics at this time for the Jews, we're about to see some other things come up, and this same rivalry or these same kinds of tensions will develop again, but that old Hellenistic party that we had seen cause so much trouble, they're virtually dead at this point. The Seleucids were comfortable dealing with the Hasidim. There was kind of that peace brokered between those two parties, and so this push from other people to become more Greek, to become ultra-Hellenized and use that as the way of making peace with our overlords, that path has kind of died off for the time being. Again, that proclivity, that tendency we'll see come up later, but for a little bit with John Hyrcanus, we have a bit of a mono party for the Jews. He does, however, do some things that are divisive and that don't go well with all of his people, with all of his constituents. It is John who is going to start this policy of conquest. Here, shortly after we have gotten our own nation back and we've got independence, not making a sacrifice to Zeus, and we can do what we want. We're our own people again. Now John Hyrcanus comes and says, well, why stop there? Let's conquer the world. Let's go out and spread the kingdom out. Really, kind of during this time, you have a push to say, this isn't what David had. This isn't what Solomon had. We don't have the full boundaries of the kingdom as it was at its peak. And we don't even have what was promised to us with the 12 tribes coming into the land in the first place. We don't even have all of our ancestral holdings. And so John begins expansion and a sort of conversion at sword point policy, specifically with a couple of these people. The Samaritans are going to be very resistant to this. They have their own religion, and they really preserve that for the next 100 years or so, at least, next couple of 100 years. So they're resistant to that. But Idumea is Edom. So when they go and conquer the Edomites, the Idumeans, they force them to convert to Judaism. And so that leads to some of the mixed, weird, Jewish but not really kind of things that we'll find in the New Testament with a family like Herod's, because Herod is an Idumean. These are the kind of people that we're going to see that dynasty coming from. We'll talk about them more next week. They play a lot into what Rome does, of course. But it's really because of this, because those, sure, nominally they're Jews. They, I guess, have now become people of the covenant. They're circumcised. They follow some of the laws. They know the Torah. They do some of that stuff. But they did that because I told their granddad I'd kill him if he didn't. And so they chose that instead. And they've only passed that down because I told Dad I'd kill him if he didn't, and I told you I'd kill you if you didn't. So what really is there that's binding you to this? It was all politically motivated from the beginning, but kind of be keeping that in mind. Again, it's part of the New Testament backdrop that we see a lot of people kind of loosely affiliated with Judaism, but who are not really participants in it in any meaningful sense. Yeah, Gary.
If I remember my reading correctly, these so-called priests were not Levites. Is that right?
It's, for many of them, it's maybe difficult to know for sure, but probably not.
Yeah.
Again, like we saw with alchemists, that was really something that was big in his favor, that he was actually, from Aaron and from the family that he needs to have been from. And with that being as big of a deal as it was, you'd kind of think, well, maybe because it was a unique thing, it was a sort of novel thing. With these men in particular, I don't know. Mattathias was serving as a priest. He might have been a Levite. To be honest, I'm not sure of that, but you could easily say it was nebulous. Yeah. So John is going to be a sort of conqueror and begins expanding things. We then have what starts to feel very much like the intrigues and the royal histories of all of the other nations, of the Greeks and the Egyptians and the Syrians and the Romans and the Persians and all these other people that we've seen and will see throughout history, where someone takes the throne and they kill all their siblings, or someone kills someone else to get the throne, or we just do whatever is necessary, shed however much blood, even my own familial blood, to get or to grasp onto power. And some of this starts with Aristobulus I, the oldest son of John Hyrcanus. But we're starting to see, again, this is not far removed from a revolt that began as they are killing our people, they are killing our children because we serve God as He commanded us. And we need to secure the right for ourselves to do that. And already here within a couple of generations, we've seen this turn into something very, very different, something very ugly, something very worldly that just resembles the people around them. Kind of the story of Israel biblically as well, isn't it? With a lot of those Old Testament kings who unfortunately are indistinguishable from the nations, from the Gentiles. But a lot of this really kind of accelerates with Aristobulus I, this oldest son of John. He imprisons 3 of his brothers, might have killed a 4th, kind of a shady record on that, but he has 3 of his brothers and his mom thrown into prison when he becomes leader and priest. And in fact, he's not satisfied with that. That seems a little wishy-washy, or that seems maybe not as firm and solid as it could be. Let's just call it king. I mean, let's just call it what it is, right? I'm the king of the Jews. And so he adopts that title for himself. He is high priest. He is also king. He further expands the Judean border, claims a little bit more territory, builds on what John had been doing. But he does not live very long either. He dies of an unknown disease, might have been poison, might have just had bad luck, might have been divine judgment. Who knows what's going on? Aristobulus dies after only 1 year as priest and king. He's succeeded by Alexander Jannaeus. We mentioned those sons who were killed, those sons of John, and the one who escaped, the one that got away and wasn't either killed or imprisoned, is Alexander. Well, don't start thinking he's a good guy because he was the survivor. And, oh, good, at least one of them made it. Maybe we'd be better off if Alexander had not made it. He continues the expansion that his father, John, started. Ultimately, I referred a moment ago to David. You know, David and Solomon historically kind of have the biggest piece of land that Israel ever does have. But they get back to about that point under Alexander, capture some of those cities on the Philistine plain, and ultimately you'd be able to look at those maps and say, yeah, they got there. They got all of that territory back that Solomon had, and the land had peace, and Solomon had no enemies. Well, now here we are 1,000 years later, back at that same point. Since he has better access to the sea, they had been kind of cut off from it with only one real port city that they controlled, but now he's pushed that border all the way to the Mediterranean, and so he's going to try to build up the navy, try to make himself just like all of the other nations. We need that kind of power. We need to start spreading things out, claiming more and more. Well, Alexander has enemies already, especially from among the Pharisees. We haven't mentioned yet the Pharisees and the Sadducees. It's during this time in history that they do start getting mentioned. I think in the life of John Hyrcanus is the first time that you'll see those parties mentioned. We've observed those dynamics before, though. A sort of conservative set and a sort of progressive sect, a more religious-minded and a more secular, one that's focused on making allies with foreign buddies to advance, and one that's more focused on preserving what is and serving by the law, those sorts of things. So we've seen these dynamics before, but now we definitely have these solidified, coalesced into the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Well, the Pharisees are very against Alexander. He does not do things the way they think he should, and we would tend to agree with them. But part of this boils over when at the Feast of Tabernacles, the Feast of Booths, he is supposed to pour out the libation, to pour out the drink offering on the altar. And he does not do it on the altar. He stands in defiance of the Pharisees, just where he is standing, and pours it out at his own feet. And so the Pharisees and their allies, their sympathizers, because it's the Feast of Tabernacles, they're holding citrons, like lemons. That's part of what they do at the Feast of Tabernacles. It's one of the 4 types of fruit or produce from the land that they would either hold the fruit itself or the leaves, the branches from the tree. But so a lot of the people are holding citrons because that's what you do at the Feast of Tabernacles. Maybe you see where this is going. Here's a guy I'm really mad at. Here's a thing in my hand that I could probably throw pretty well. So they start pelting him with all of those citrons. And this angers Alexander quite a bit. And so he strikes back, kills, it seems, a few hundred people in this first conflict, this first kind of battle, really, that erupts as a result of that. The Pharisees try to get some outside help and go to Syria and say, come, do something about this guy. Many have mentioned what strange bedfellows this makes. They go to the Syrian kings. This is the Pharisees, who are the descendants of the Hasidim. They are now going to the Seleucid kings, the descendants of Antiochus Epiphanes, to get help to fight against the descendants of Judas Maccabeus. So 2 old forces fighting against each other, but now kind of flipped into totally different dimensions and what they're trying to accomplish. But that does not go well for the Pharisees. They kind of can't get as much help as they thought, and Alexander and his forces put them down with extreme prejudice, crush them in battle, and in the aftermath of all of this, he has 800 people, mostly Pharisees. It doesn't seem exclusively like official members of the Pharisean sect, but Pharisees mostly. He has 800 of them crucified. He has their wives and children killed before them, before they die. and does all this at a banquet where he is dining with his many concubines. As I said, not a great guy, not someone that we really needed to have done anything during this time. But Alexander does what he does. Maybe later in his life, as he is about to die, he speaks to his wife, Salome Alexandra, and says, you need to try to make amends with the Pharisees. And boy, you'd like to be there to tell them, maybe you shouldn't have crucified 800 of them. Maybe you shouldn't have been this terrible monster. But nonetheless, the damage being done at that point, he urges, it seems later in his life, urges his ultimate successor, his wife, Salome Alexandra, to try to mend fences with the Pharisees, maybe for the good of the people, maybe for her own good, I don't know. But she will end up ruling for about 9 years. She had been married to both of those men, those two brothers, Aristobulus I and Alexander. And she has two sons, who it seems are half-brothers, sons of each of those men. One, Hyrcanus II, serves as high priest. Aristobulus II is kind of the military leader. And she, as I said, is sympathetic to the Pharisees, ends up kind of elevating them. And this was of great consternation to the Sadducees. When she ultimately dies, there is more Civil War type stuff, one party backing another person and the other backing another person. The Sadducees want the military man, Aristobulus, to be the new priest and to be the new king and leader. They have greater military might. They're more used to fighting. They have better allies outside of Judea. And so they are able to kick Hyrcanus out as high priest, and he, who is the favorite of the Pharisees, flees to Nabatea, flees to Arabia, we would say. We'll meet up with him later because that'll have some input from Herod's family, ultimately. Well, Pompey the Great, this great Roman general, uses all of this, and we referred to this a little bit last week, to kind of come into the entire region and say, party's over, Rome is here, you guys know the drill, this will be happening for the next 300 years or so. We own everything now, and so time to cool off. And that's basically where things will leave off for the Romans. They gain Judea, it's accepted into Rome as a province, and that will end up mostly setting the stage for what we see in the New Testament. We'll talk more about Rome next week. All right, that is the general history that we've been talking about. Now, what's going on with the Jews during this time? Hopefully you've been paying attention. All of that was Jewish history. We don't kind of can't do our normal setup because everything we've been talking about had to do with the Jews and what was going on with them. All right, why does any of this matter? What's developing during this time specific to the Jews and their religion? Key idea, and we'll look at this in more detail in a couple of weeks. I want to examine the different sects that we see in the New Testament, how they developed and what they are, what they mean. But we're starting to see that solidification here, Pharisee and Sadducee. And going by from what we talked about a moment ago, and I've made this point before, but worth reiterating. When you come to the Gospels and you see the people who are aligned against Jesus, and you see Pharisee and Sadducee standing hand in hand to get this Galilean rabbi dispatched, to get this, we've got to kill this man, we've got to get rid of him, he's a threat to all of us. Recognize that not so long ago in this history, 100 years ago, these two parties were literally crucifying each other. We're going to war with each other in the streets. We maybe sometimes think of, okay, well, they're just people who saw things differently, two parties, Democrats and Republicans, basically the same thing, right? If you were a Republican and in 1926, Democrats had crucified 800 Republicans on the steps of the Capitol, would you be saying now, we need to extend a hand across the aisle and, we're really kind of all the same thing. We can work with them on a lot of stuff. No, you'd be, this is blood enemy. This is a lengthy blood feud that we have. These people do not get along. There is the worst of man in their history against each other. And so seeing them each united in this desire to kill Jesus tells us a lot about how threatened they were, how spiteful they were of him and everything that he was doing. Again, we'll focus on that a little bit later as well. Obviously, from what we're seeing, the power of the high priest during this time reaches the peak because he is the priest and the king. It's the same guy in the same office that they have for this short period of their history, just like Melchizedek. And yet, how did it go in this case? But here's the high priest wielding the most power he will ever have. But still, by the time of Jesus, still by the time of the New Testament, although they don't have a king because they will be under Roman occupation, the high priest is still he's our top guy. This is the person with the most power in the land. So when Annas or when Caiaphas or when whoever it is gives us an order to do something, we go and do it. If they are telling us we need to get rid of this rabbi, then we get rid of him. I mean, you've got to listen to the priest. There will be a continued glorification, a continued zealous desire for political independence. This will carry through to the Roman age. We don't want people interfering with us. We don't want people stirring up trouble, telling us how we can and can't worship. We fear that. We fear the outside influence, and we want to get rid of them at all means. We want someone to come and save us from that. We want someone like Judas who's going to come and drive them out. We want someone who's going to come and assassinate their leaders and kill their officials and go storm the fort that's here in Jerusalem, just like those heroes of old did. This continues to be what so many of the common people are looking for. But, and maybe this is the most important thing that we gain from this period of history, there's a way this can happen, and there's a way this can't. If we're looking for deliverance for the people, if we're looking for freedom for the people, if we're looking for a king and a priest, all this that we've been looking at is the worldly way of doing it. You have a king and a priest. You have freedom from your enemies. You have your own country again, and the land that God promised to you. You have all of that again. And what happens? How does it go? It goes terribly. It devolves into the same kind of immoral, disgusting, wretched, vile wickedness that all the nations around them fall into. It lasts for a few generations. They're spiritually bankrupt. They're morally bankrupt. None of those great promises that you can read about in Daniel or in Jeremiah or anything where it's saying, yes, you will be punished, but yes, the temple will be rebuilt and the nation will come back to glory and it will be this wonderful thing. None of that has happened. Can we do it by might? Can we do it by fighting against enough enemies and rebuilding the temple enough times and bringing in enough wealth through the ship channels that we end up becoming this great thing that God has promised to us? That way does not seem to work. Here's the test case that says, we can't do it ourselves. So what kind of Messiah, what kind of anointed deliverer are we looking for? If anyone is paying attention during this time in Israel's history, they're figuring out, I think we need a different way. I think there must be a different path forward in that. Not by might, says the Lord, not by power, but by my Spirit. This is how God is going to accomplish his will ultimately for his people. That's how the promises will be fulfilled. That's how the temple will take any significance, because he's building a new temple. He's fulfilling all of the promises. He is giving the people a new land of promise. He's giving the people a new Sabbath. He's giving the people a new Passover. He's going to do all of those things through Christ. Expectations for many would be able to see that because they have seen the failure, they've seen the disappointment so many times when it's done through man's means, when it's done through worldly means. Now, here just a short little while later, 60 years later, we're going to see the possibility of this happening through God's power and in a spiritual sense with the true Messiah. All right, next week we'll see what the Romans end up doing with these folks. So be looking forward to that next week, and that will lead us right up to the point of Matthew starting his gospel off. Thanks so much for your time, as always.
100-year-old